Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I am so excited, stoked to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Susie Wise and Morgan Vienne. FAN is a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, and social justice, among others. We have over 175 videos of past events archived on our website and YouTube channel, so please be sure to explore. And now introductions. Susie Wise, our new best friend, is a designer with experience in education, tech, and the social sector. Professor Wise teaches at the Hassel-Plattner Institute of Design, known as the D School at Stanford University, and coaches leaders in innovation practices, equity design, and storytelling for inclusion. She founded and led the D School's K-12 lab, catalyzing national projects like School Retool and the Shadow a Student Challenge. She is also a co-creator of Liberatory design. Morgan Vienne is a leader, a learner, and a designer, and is now our new best friend. Her current suite of work includes serving as the CEO of Design for Emergence, a design facilitator with the K-12 lab at Stanford's D School, and Liberatory design faculty for the National Equity Project. In recent years, Vienne has been a deeper learning coach with Envision Learning Partners, a school retool coach with IDEO, and a Mira Fellow, where she learned to incubate world-changing ideas. She's got to train me on that. Prior to this chapter, she was the principal of an arts integration expeditionary learning school called Ascend in Oakland and served as a founding teacher in Oakland's new small autonomous schools movement. It is my deep pleasure to bring to you Susie Wise and Morgan Vienne.
Thank you so much, Lonnie. Thank you. Thank you. Susie Wise.
Hey, Morgan.
Thank you so much for choosing me and inviting me to host you in this important conversation. I'm so honored to be here with you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful that you said yes to this fun time.
I know better. I say yes to Susie Wise. I want to start us out. I think first I want to say, in my home, as you know, you're known as Susie Wise, the wisest. And often when I speak of you when you're not present, I call you the great Susie Wise. I started to know you early on. I thought of you as like a celebrity crush. And then you became a mentor and now a colleague and crew and dear friend. I would love to tell all of the good folks here with us a little bit about our relationship and would love for you to launch into that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And thank you for those really kind words. I feel the belonging all around. And thank you to Lonnie and everyone for having us. So Morgan and I got to meet when, as Lonnie mentioned, you were a principal at a K-8 expeditionary learning school here in Oakland, California, where I live. And it was in the early days of a program that we called School Retool. And this was a program specifically working with school leaders, helping leaders to adopt design mindsets by hacking. And we did not mean this in any kind of cyber criminal kind of way. We meant, can you take up what's going on in your school and try small, scrappy experiments to move things in the right direction, to be more student-centered and more deeply aware of who was belonging, really, although we didn't call it that then. We were thinking about who was furthest from opportunity and how could we change school culture. And you were the principal of an amazing school in Oakland and joined this program. And we're a hacker at heart, clearly. Design was a new method to you explicitly, but it was implicitly so much in your bones. And you took it up in such a beautiful and interesting way that I was really moved by it. And part of that work, what we were thinking about as we were moving this program nationally, we were thinking about how could we be more explicit about the equity agenda that we had in this work. And we started doing some prototyping out here in the Bay Area, and you were one of the first leaders that we tried to convince to do that work with us. And it really led to us getting much more explicit about belonging being one of the fundamental goals of any kind of school change work. So we got to meet then and work deeply on what kind of became the seeds of this book project.
I'm so grateful for that time and all that it's brought us. I mean, yeah, I think I'll take up some of the story there to just kind of lift up. You have from the school retool work into being a co-creator of Liberatory design, into now this design for belonging work, you have continued to make these tools and frameworks that are so applicable across so many contexts and have really allowed me a doorway and a pathway for just cultivating my own design practice and becoming a builder and dreamer and doer around liberatory design in particular. So I'm just deep gratitude to you and excited to talk about this current work because I think that it has amazing potential. I know that it does, and the world really needs it right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so let's start there. Let's talk about the origin story of that moment and when you started to bring in design for belonging. Why that? Why now?
Absolutely. So as I shared, working on this program around supporting school leaders to change cultures at school, and started to notice that as we ask more explicitly, so what's an equity challenge that you're facing in your school? Folks were mostly game to talk about it, but it was interesting to me that it would get some folks would get kind of scared and agitated. Other folks would have a kind of very technical response and start like pulling out numbers to talk about what was happening in their school from a kind of numbers perspective. And that didn't feel quite right. And I knew those weren't the leaders, that wasn't really how they led their schools. But there was something about the frame of diversity, equity, and inclusion that would freeze a lot of folks. And as I started to kind of try to move and play and think about how we could open up those conversations, because again, I knew that those educators cared deeply about serving all the students in their school and not continuing practices that were not serving all students. A friend and colleague of mine, Victor Carey from the National Equity Project, gave me a 2-page excerpt from John Powell and Stephen Menendian's work on othering and belonging. And I started to prototype with, if I handed that little bit of Powell and Menendian's writing to leaders to think about belonging, it just seemed to crack things open for people. And it allowed folks to get back to the feeling that they knew they wanted to have for themselves in their school as adults working to support young people, and also that they wanted so many students to have more of. So I was just really intrigued by how that kind of shift from only thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion to adding the frame of belonging became really helpful for folks. And again, I think the way I've kind of framed the book and learning from that was really that moving to that place of feeling was really helpful. And then when you combine that with the power of design to help you do scrappy, to help you do small scrappy experiments and understand what's working and avoid the kind of rollout of giant programs, but rather being flexible and nimble in leadership and development and trying new things, that those design mindsets really paired very, very well with seeking the feelings of belonging.
It's so powerful. And I love what you said about it being sort of applicable across stakeholder groups, and it absolutely is, and across sectors, right? Like this feeling that we all need to feel in order to thrive and stay and do matters, right? And so that's really exciting. Can I now kind of move us into this book, because I've been really lucky to be close to this work with you and get to sort of run a few prototypes over the last few years, but you have built this into a framework, a toolkit, and now this gorgeous book. If you could start by describing this text for those who haven't read it just yet, what is this book?
Yeah, so this book, Design for Belonging, How to Build Inclusion and Collaboration in Your Communities, Morgan has it. And I think Lonnie said you can still buy it and come to the after party. The book is organized around feeling, seeing, and shaping belonging. So it's that notion that I was just mentioning, that we have to feel what we're trying to get to, and that's the feeling of belonging. So there are lots of exercises and some frameworks around how do you feel it? Where do you feel it? Asking yourself, your colleagues, the students in your school to map places that they feel belonging and not. can be a really powerful exercise. There are others about thinking about your town and doing some other kinds of mapping, some emotional journey mapping.
Yes.
Those are tools to feel it. And then in the frame, you want to think about seeing belonging beyond just your own feelings about it. Where are folks struggling to belong? And where are they feeling it, and naming those as concrete moments that sets you up. Ooh, Morgan's got some moments. Yeah, we decided not to do slides, but to hold up a few of the spreads. The book has some really fun spreads in it, and shout out to incredible mural artist, DC-based mural artist Rose Jaffe, who created all the illustrations in this book. Those moments are the things that then you can design with, and the shaping belonging is then picking up your toolkit, your toolbox of design levers to play with. So you might imagine that the moment of the invitation is something that you want to address, and you can think not just about sending an email to invite somebody, but how does your space function as an invitation? What's the kind of role that you can create to set up an invitation? Maybe we'll go into more moments, but just to say the framework overall for the book is feeling, seeing, and shaping belonging. And I hope it's a book that's really helpful to get working, because as you were saying, I'm really a tool builder, even more than an author. And so I want this to be a really useful book that you can pick up. You can, I think, read it from start to finish and it will still make sense. But you can also pick it up in the middle and start to think about what are your moments. I'll show you a page too, right? The invitation here is to think about what are your moments of belonging. These are the moments that I call out, but what are yours?
Yes, 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 yes. I love that. And I would love for us to just pause for a second and actually call out a few of the exercises or pieces of this text that are kind of exciting for us right now. I can start and just say, I was, heavily post-it text here, and have had the good fortune of being able to do a number of the things. But there are a few in my ZPD that I am kind of noodling on as a leader and in the work that I'm doing.
You got to say what your ZPD, what ZPD means.
In my zone of proximal development for all you educators and non-educators out there.
Just a little belonging move there, breaking down the acronyms.
Thank you. Yes. The space where I have some dissonance and I'm learning, right? And I just think about how critical and complex the moments of participation and designing for those, and how people participate across context and space and time is something really relevant right now. The moment of contribution and how those show up, because it's not just one moment, it's moments over space and time across different groups and sort of teams. And so those are really on my mind. And then the other one that I wanted to bring up in here, it's on page 75, is the diverging and exiting. And I love what you say in here around just the piece that if you're really tending to humans, then people come and go. They come and go in meetings, they come and go in conversations, they come and go in workspaces and families and in all these contexts. And we can design for that, for those to be meaningful, caring moments of belonging. So I'm really hyped about those. What is your fave right now? What are you into?
Well, I'll say two. I'll double down on the moment of contributing or contribution. It was a moment, I'm a prototyper. To get to tools, you have to build prototypes. So I was in the early days of this work doing a lot of different moment maps and sharing them with people. And I got to spend a week down at UT Austin sharing tools with faculty and students and colleagues. And in that week, I had a particular set of moments. I'm looking to see where it is. I had a particular set of moments, and neither contribution nor repair were part of the set at that moment. And it was in that kind of deep dive in conversations with folk and then reflecting and synthesizing that I really recognize that moment of contribution as being such a key moment of belonging. Oftentimes when you talk to people, and this, by the way, for educators and other folks on this call right now, when you do the exercise of inviting people to map some highs and lows that they've had around belonging, you're likely to hear people talk about a time when they felt like they contributed to something in their community as being one of their highs of belonging. So that really stuck out to me as a moment that had to be considered. It's one where you can even just ask that question of folks. What's a time when you felt like you contributed to our team or our school or our community more broadly? And then the other moment being repair, which is this really important piece as so many communities dig into histories of othering in community. We need to be able to unearth. It's not enough to just have a beautiful moment of invitation, but there is often a corresponding need to repair. And so I was recently working actually with a school group out here in California. And it was a parent group, and we've been introducing kind of the frame of design for belonging and talking about it. And then we did some office hours, and folks were coming back to talk about some stuff that was happening. And a few parents were bringing up that they wanted to think about how to invite some different subgroups from their school community into activities that they're planning. And we started to go down the road of thinking about what are ways that you can redesign, reimagine the invitation in for different kinds of folks in your community. And then someone really bravely said, I want to speak to an elephant in the room. There's something that happened 6 months ago where a beloved event that we used to have got shifted in a particular way. It was very uncomfortable for many people, and I just don't think we've addressed it. And that's then really able to take that up then as a moment of repair. And I in no way mean to say that repair is easy, but it is necessary as we are building belonging as a way to lessen othering and bridge towards belonging. So those are the two moments that often really pop up for me, that what does it mean to contribute and what does it mean to repair?
Yes. Wow, I love that. And it makes me want to head into sort of this next piece, which is to ask you, where do you already know about where this work is being taken up? Like, tell us more stories. Who's using it now and what's coming up?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of school folks have been reaching out, sharing what they've been doing. I've also been hearing a lot from folks in informal learning spaces, a little bit of newer for me, folks reaching out from healthcare that are saying that they're really using particularly the moments to think about what's happening in their clinic, or also in some folks that were reaching out that were about kind of medical outreach teams and what that looks like. Also some work around people experiencing homelessness, and thinking about the range of services that a particular municipality was offering around services for people experiencing homelessness. So those have been some of the places that I've been hearing from.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think about just how in these moments of belonging, because we're all constantly looking for signals, right? Every time we sort of enter or exit, or in all of these moments, we're looking for signals. And how quickly those signals come up for us around, like, is this a place where I'm seen? How am I valued here? How am I recognized here? Can I participate? And so, a few of the contexts that you spoke of, and I know even as I brainstorm more that this could sort of really be a game changer in, there are many populations and subgroups who are invisible in so many contexts. And this power of designing for belonging and really intentionally facilitating those levers and those moves to signal faster and sooner that you should stay and be with us here, because this is, a place for you. Just gives me goosebumps to think about. And I imagine a world where that's true in more context. So
thank you. Can I use that as a chance to talk about the host heroes?
Yes.
Yeah. Because it's a fun piece of the book. And what made me think of it is it made me think of a couple different people, actually, one being Claude Steele. So this is the image. There we go. This is the image that we call the host heroes. And I had this idea really early in the book process that I wanted there to be kind of a pantheon of different influences that I wanted to share around folks that think about belonging in some different ways. And so it's a real mixture of folks, right? Laverne Cox is there, the trans activist, but so are scholars like Claude Steele, who helps us think about stereotype threat. And really what that was making me think of it, Morgan, is because he's so clear in his work about what and how we get cues for belonging. Neil Farrington, a Chicago-based scholar that some people on this call might know, who helps us think about how belonging is necessary for learning and for taking up a learning mindset in school. And then also Brene Brown, who maybe for many people may have popularized in Braving the Wilderness, may have popularized the notion of true belonging, which speaks a little bit to how belonging, the importance of belonging, because it can start to be portable. You can carry belonging with you. And so if you've experienced it in some places, it can help you in other places. So I just thought that was the connection I was making there. And just, I think it's, for me as a designer, I'm trying to draw from a lot of different domains and disciplines and invite others to do similar. What is belonging? You know, what's a poem that speaks to you in terms of belonging, or some other kind of literary piece that might be meaningful in your community? I think there are lots of traditions and lots of ways of thinking that have bearing on belonging that can be really interesting creative fodder. Thinking about what it means in your world.
I heard you say before, just on that note, and love it, this idea that belonging goes with you, and that it can turn over, it can snowball, right? Like if we have more of us who have more felt experiences of belonging, then we know it better in ourselves, and we know it better in those around us, and can even get to those conversations faster. I think that's really cool. It's contagious in that way. Yeah.
And I think then we can use that to make the link, right? The book has two parts. It's design and it's belonging. And so if we're thinking like, what does belonging feel like? And going back to that felt acquaintance that we might have with it and using that to potentially feel it in more places, that's a piece. That flip side then is design and remembering that everything, right, that we have right now, our systems, our buildings, right, our processes, whatever they are, have been designed, and that also means they can be redesigned. So remembering that empowering piece of design is part of my mission with this book too, is to kind of open up and remind us that, again, we have more to design than besides emails.
Oh, yes. Well, let's head down the design route, because I think this is an important piece. So both you and I did not come to design sort of by the traditional design discipline route. And here we are, and you first. And so tell us a little bit about sort of, what does design do for the conversation of belonging? And tell us more about that piece.
Yeah. I think the key thing that design does for us is remind us to create with intention. The design is a method of creative problem solving, and what its lenses can offer us is to be in intention, to create purposefully. And then the other piece of design, in addition to like the creation, is the learning from what's happening, the recognition of emergence, that we're going to create something and not know for whom it's going to work precisely. We try in a design process to understand that, but in fact, in complexity, we're not always going to know what's going to emerge. And so we also need to tune ourselves to keep asking, to keep paying attention, to notice and reflect, and to care. So a reminder that design is not a technical endeavor. It's actually a caring endeavor. It's a paying attention to what's happening, to build something, to make a change that you want to see, and then sticking with it. So the book contains a little bit of a push to designers to remember that belonging is an outcome that we really need, and that part of our responsibility in creating context is to stick with the process enough to look to see if belonging has actually emerged or not. Have you slipped in the opposite direction and started moving to othering the very group you were hoping to invite in, for instance?
Yes. Well, let's take that opportunity. Will you speak for a moment on the connection? We're doing this to each other. Go, you say.
I didn't know if you wanted to say something about what design has meant for you in this space.
Oh gosh. I mean, I really connect to what you said, and something that a few things that I often say about it, and building on what you named there, is that design does a few things that I think are so critical in leading and making change through complexity, which is that it pushes us to not replace systems with systems. It nudges us to stay in the problem space longer, and even gives us permission to do that. And I think that it moves us through the paralysis that can often be created in hard moments, right? And it, even in its essence, because of the creativity and the sort of way that we get ourselves to be in the mode of design, it helps us to activate our joy through those hard moments, and to take that humanized and present approach to finding opportunities. And that just, I think that removes some of the stuckness, right? And gives us permission to be like our authentic, creative, joyful selves, even in the face of making hard change.
That resonates for me. And it strikes me that that's part of why the focus on belonging is useful, because that is that necessary and very human and ultimately positive, presumably, experience that we as humans are wanting to have, and we're wanting as leaders to support in community.
Yes. No, definitely. And I was hoping that you would next, my point at you next for the next piece was to hear you speak on the connection that you see and have created between liberatory design and design for belonging, and how do those two things situate together?
Sure. So liberatory design is a framework for thinking about human-centered design with a very explicit equity and complexity lenses. I think I used the verb wrong somewhere in there, but bringing a complexity lens and an equity lens to design to help us to ground in what it really takes to make progress towards equity. It brings strongly in some of the mindsets related to self-reflection, radical collaboration, working to address harm and acknowledge trauma. These pieces that if one were only thinking of creativity and design as a kind of capitalistic endeavor, right, we might not take enough time to dig into those. And what design then offers in that frame of thinking with an equity lens and a complexity lens then becomes that orientation towards trying things and understanding what is and isn't working. To use design, to use hacks, as we were talking about, small scrappy experiments as probes to see the system that we're a part of, to see where the resistance is for making change, and to understand also where like deep pain and hurt exists in order to understand those moments of repair that are needed.
And you worked on both of those, Susie Wise. Let's snap for that. I'm so grateful for that work in those pieces, and I'm just excited about what you're saying there. I think actually this is a cool moment for us to think about just, a bit of a provocation and kind of pushing on thinking a little bit, because we get to talk about designing for belonging quite a bit together, but one that we started to chew on, and there's a lot more to chew and figure out, is attention around, as you mentioned earlier, you talked about school retool and hacking and sort of the scrappy way, the whole sentiment of small pieces lead to big change, right? Small hacks lead to big change. I want to think about that tension between scrappy and scalable, right? And starting to imagine a little bit, how do we get from designing moments of belonging to belonging at a systems level? What might that even mean or look like? What comes up for you?
Yeah, I mean, want to imagine that we can design for belonging at scale, but then I don't know what at scale means.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things I want to think about is, what are systems that we're in that we're hoping to create to make change in? So education or healthcare, criminal justice, all systems that we know need to evolve to be less racist, let's say it straight up, to be more human-centered. And I think some of the work of design for belonging is to pause for some moments on scale, and actually dig into the challenges that real live humans in their small scale communities are grappling with, and start to, I'm a big believer in some of the work around bright spots. And kind of the notion of excellent local solutions to big intractable problems, and looking for where that's happening, and not so as to pick it up and scale it, but so as to be able to use it as inspiration to and even a probe, right? Oh, wow, it's really interesting how this particular school was able to reduce their suspension rates and, eliminate kind of racial profiling in that context. That's really good work. What's our version of that going to look like? That's part of that work of the small scrappy experiments, is to say, yes, that's really interesting work. And our school looks different on a whole number of different dimensions, but we're going to take some of that inspiration and design our solution and see what that looks like. And that might mean that we bubble up to a solution that a lot of folks can try, but it may also mean that we frame that as a challenge that we're hoping that every school takes on. And that's how we start to get to scale around it.
I love that. Yeah. And I mean, the Shadow Student Challenge was such an example of that also, right? Making that connection live this moment too. I have heard you say so many times, and I know we share this thinking that that systems are made of people, right? Like, we often think they're a machine. Systems are a machine that have all these moving parts, and they're super complex, and we don't know how they work, and we're not sure how to, where you throw a wrench in to make it stop. But systems are people, and it's people holding these things in place. And I that thinking helps me noodle on this question a little bit, just in terms of even if, whether on the moment level or on the grandiose scale, I was kind of just thinking that even to implement any of those sort of solutions one might come up with, or a group might come up with, you can design for belonging along that whole journey to make sure that humans are coming with you and you are doing it together. That alone.
100%. Yeah. We have to, right, even as we're understanding what the kind of policy levers are that we have to help things move along and spread and scale, we are always wanting to recognize the real people seeing themselves in the needs of that policy. That policy can't just be an esoteric kind of instrument. I think that the design for belonging framework, the coming back to what does it really feel like, to inquiring of others, what does belonging feel like? I think the inquiry thread is really important here, almost at any level, that we need to be and can be inquiring of the real people that we're working with, the real people that we're concerned about, of when and where are they feeling belonging, and looking to understand then what are the moments that need the most work, and being in there.
Yeah. It's cool. It's cool in that way to just notice how the moments that are offered and then all the ones that we could imagine do fall in this continuum over time. And you can just keep doing that, right? Because you're constantly entering, you're constantly in, and then you're constantly exiting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a part of, right, that's part of the mindset of design too, is like that you are iterating. Our communities are evolving. We're hopefully building towards the better. And we're also needing to pay attention to when we're not either.
That's right. Yeah. And that the sense of belonging evolves. That's happening too.
Yeah.
So that makes me think, just to kind of take it to another turn, where do you want to see this go? Let's manifest some of that now. Who do we hope, what entities, what fields, what communities might we imagine start to take this up?
Yeah. Well, so I mentioned healthcare.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to grasp what criminal justice work looks like in terms of belonging. That might not be the right starter frame for the incredible work that needs to happen around criminal justice. Hopefully, if we start to work on design for belonging in a lot of other contexts, we can start to we can divest in some ways from an over reliance on criminal justice. So I'm just admitting to you, I know there's really important work to do. I'm not sure design for belonging is the starting place for that work. I want to start elsewhere. In addition to, my background in education and learning, I've also been starting to think a little bit about our food systems, which is another kind of massive system. I bring up food as one of the levers of design in the book. So of course it's only treated lightly, but it is like belonging, this profound need that we have to be nourished. And some of the systems we have around supporting all people to have food are really not great at celebrating who they are, how they're living, what their cultures are, etc. So I'm really interested to do some new work around the intersection of design for belonging and food justice.
Yes, that is so exciting. And I know you have a class coming up that you're going to teach on that work.
Yeah. How about, can I ask the question back to you? Where are you thinking that you want to see design for belonging show up? And then I have another one too.
Okay. Well, I have to tell you that, and I think I've mentioned this before, but I say this with love. Every time I go to like a really sterile sort of government held space like the DMV, I sit there and think to myself, I don't belong here, just because it's very strange and uncomfortable and just weird, takes a lot of time. But also, does anyone? And I even think about the folks behind the barriers and how they're feeling. And and sometimes it looks like their spaces aren't even their spaces. I mean, as two people who clearly have spaces.
Right. Right. So that makes me think of our friends at Sevilla in Detroit and their frame of public serving institutions, right? So loving for any government / public serving institutions to take up design for belonging. I also think there's a really interesting moment that we have now in kind of the shift around work, whether we're calling it the Great Resignation, or I heard it referred to as the Great Reflection. We're in this moment where there's so much movement around work and career and what that looks like. I'm really intrigued to think about how we can take up design for belonging in terms of that.
Yeah.
And as I'm saying that, I'm also thinking about work that I think a lot of folks on this call are doing, with young people, with teens, and thinking again, kind of in this moment, post-pandemic, I don't know if we're post-pandemic or where we are, but in this moment, vis-a-vis the pandemic,
Yeah.
we're thinking about teen mental health. And belonging is not the only focus, I think, of moving us through that, but it is certainly an angle. It's a part of it.
Yeah, no, that really, we've been able to do some good work thinking about that lately too. And it's such a critical piece. And I did, absolutely want to say that I feel like every project or every opportunity that I find myself in, that this piece and opportunity to design for belonging comes up, and it resonates so deeply with people all over. Right. So yeah, that is really powerful. And it even makes me think about a lot of just what's happening in the current times with politics. And there's a lot of othering and a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of harmful behavior that is not humanized and not caring. And so we even are seeing such a shift of, folks who maybe started to feel like they belonged, and then something swung a different direction. And now there's a really big different feeling. And so, right, like, how are we also tending to these moments as things change for huge populations? That's coming up a lot for me too. And I'm interested in working on those things.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about, there's an incredible organization, Welcoming America, that thinks really explicitly about immigrants to our country, both historically and contemporarily. Like, that's a huge place of need for design for belonging. I think in some ways, some of those contexts are tuned to it a little bit more, certainly in terms of those kind of initial moments for belonging, of the invitation and the entry and the joining. We may attend to that. I think it's really powerful then to think of some of those other moments. We didn't speak of dissent yet. And that, right, which is called out as a moment. And I think of it too as a kind of uncommon measure of belonging. I talk about it that way in the book, of that if you are able to, this is as an individual or as a community, if you are able to raise concerns, to make demands, to push on the structures. This is one of the ways I think it intersects with that question of systems design and getting to scale too. How are we building in opportunities to push and give feedback and dissent into our work? And can we see that really as a measure of belonging? And I think we can do that in a kind of analytical way too, to look out and see what kind of a dissent is emerging when and where right now in our culture, and what does that mean about who is feeling belonging and who isn't, and can we then address those real needs?
I think it's a really important point that you bring up, and adding on to that, wanting folks to know, folks who are buying this book and getting ready to dive in and think about the applicability here, that belonging is not at all just facilitated in the good times.
Right. Yeah.
So it's what you say about the dissent piece, and the room for conflict, the room to be seen in that, the room to be heard in that, the room to ask for room in that, right? All of those things feel so important. And I think many of us can connect to the piece around, in hard times, sometimes some of our strongest relationships and bonds are forged there. Right. And
you're making me think, I'll bring out, I mentioned him before as an inspirational figure, John Powell. But the quote that I have in the book from him is, belonging means more than just being seen. Belonging entails having a meaningful voice and the opportunity to participate in the design of social and cultural structures. Belonging means having the right to contribute to and make demands on society and political institutions. And it's interesting. And I love that we're having this conversation, and it's making me think new thoughts. So thank you. There's a piece in there that is it does for me get to the scale question. If we had that kind of belonging in our different institutions and all kinds of people were able to contribute, right, and make demands on the structures, how might they move? And that might be a totally different definition for what scale is. It might be oriented towards creating positive change.
Yeah, something that's so powerful about that is that it really starts to push on some of what I know many of us imagine, which is a world where the power dynamics look different, right? Because in that, there's such a conversation around power and who benefits from that and who gets to be a part of it and who gets to make choices about what we do and do not take up. And that world that you're describing, I think, whether it's at a university or, in a workspace or at the house with the family, it shifts so much, and begs to question, like, who has final say here, or how do we make decisions, right? All that good stuff. And those are the conversations at all the layers that I feel we need to be having. And so I get excited when I think about who might pick this thing up.
Yeah. Yeah, and the depth and breadth then of belonging has the potential to really shift power.
Yeah,
in really important ways.
That's right. So let me head into sort of this last piece that I have for you, which is, you've been on a tour essentially lately. You've got a bunch of good work you're about to do. You've got podcasts happening and really great conversations emerging and people reaching out left and right, which is so awesome to witness and well-deserved. What is the call to action right now? Like if you are calling all the people forth, here or not here, because the folks who are not here, like Biden, call us.
Yeah. Mayor Pete.
Yeah, call us. Give us a call to action.
Yeah, I mean, the call to action is really the framework of the book. Feel it, see it, shape it. So do be however big of a team you lead or big of a school you lead or however small, do for yourself the reflection on where do you feel belonging and where don't you? Because that is incredibly powerful empathy and understanding for what belonging really is.
Yeah.
And then start to inquire of others, again, in your organization at whatever scale, when and where do they feel it? And take seriously where people don't feel belonging and attend to those moments as places that you can shape, that you can reshape, that you can experiment with. Because it can feel hard and overwhelming. And yet, if we start with some specific moments, we can make some progress and then use these tools more broadly.
Yes. Can I ask you one more before we kind of head into the closing of this? Because I haven't asked you this in a while, and I'm curious. What are you learning about your own sense of belonging and where you belong with this?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll say, maybe I'll say two things. One is that I've found that it has been useful to reflect back on some times and places where I didn't feel belonging. And I think my mom and stepdad are on the call. And if you've seen the book or watched the video, there's the wedding scene. One thing I feel is so far from that moment in a way that's like really helpful for me. Like I feel a deep and much more robust sense of feeling of belonging in my own family. And that feels very personally satisfying.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is just knowing that I actually want this work to land somewhere. I'm ready for a next chapter of deep professional belonging. So that's not like, I'm not asking for a job from anyone. And yet I'm quite interested in where can this work land in a kind of institutional home, to have that kind of belonging again. I've been quite independent for several years now, and I'm ready for that kind of professional home again.
Oh, Susie, I'm so glad I asked you that question. And anyone listening out there, if you just heard that the great Susie Wise is actually ready to sort of take up this next charge and land somewhere to do that in community, I mean, I'm calling you right away. Obviously.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
that was
yeah.
not planned. Let's be
No,
clear.
not planned. Totally off the cuff.
But the real
yeah.
answer.
Yeah, no, that's really real. And you'll have to keep us all posted on what you decide.
For sure. For sure.
Well, I want to thank you again so much for allowing me to host this conversation and be in it with you. I'm absolutely honored.
No, thank you so much. And there's Lonnie.
Yep, there's Lonnie.
Morgan. Thank you,
Yes,
Morgan.
thank you. And Lonnie, I have a light beam happening across me.
I know, I love it. I love how it's been like gradually going up. I was a little worried, like I wasn't quite sure how fast it was going to go. And if at some point we were just going to get your nose and your mouth, kind of like some, a little bit. It was going to be kind of funny. I think you're okay for another minute or two. Thank you, Morgan and Susie both. But Morgan, what a great interview. Just, we've seen lots and 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 lots of Zoom interviews over the last 2 years. And it's so nice when, above and beyond the rapport between two people, but when the interviewer is clearly so prepared and ready and not just looking at what's question number 4 and question number 5, but listening and then responding. It's such a treat. It seems sort of basic, but you'd be surprised how not basic it is. And I ain't naming names, but I'm just saying it's really, really good. And now that I know that Susie Wise has got her resume out there, Susie, maybe you can be dropping that into chat, feel free. Who knew?
Yeah.
Who knew? I'm going to be going home at night going, if only I could afford Susie Wise. And I'm sure you're not overpriced. I just... How can we afford Susie Wise? Maybe some consulting. Exactly. I'm really glad. It was such a great convo. So a couple things. Let's start by saying, come hang out with Susie and Morgan. And I'm deputizing our dear friend Liz Gerber, who is on this call, who dumped a couple questions in chat because we love her in the Q&A. So she gave us some great questions. I'm going to get to them in a minute. I'm deputizing Liz Gerber to be a co-host. I'm sure she's very good at rising to those spontaneous occasions. So I'm sure she'll be thrilled. So come hang out with us. Come have fun at after hours. I have a little surprise for everybody in after hours. So come find out what the surprise is. And all you got to do is buy a copy of Susie's very excellent book. It is so great. I love the whole series. You saw, I think probably in the PowerPoint at the beginning that we hosted Sarah Stein Greenberg. Loved that book as well. All of them. They're just, if only we had more bandwidth, I would have hosted all those folks. It's just such a great series that Stanford put out. Really, that one. We hosted her back in September. I think it was September. Oh God, I love that book so much. Anyway, let me move back. We're at 7:55. Let's get a couple questions in here. So let's start with somebody who's not Liz, though I adore every single thing about Liz. But we're going to go with Cheryl. Cheryl says, might there be a risk of these tools being used for untoward purposes, or has this been factored into the design? Did you catch that? With Susie, I know you were moving books around. Okay.
I think that's it's always a risk. And I think what design helps you do is build in safe to fail experiments to ensure that's the way we work. And that's the method that's offered in the book, is to do safe to fail experiments so that you're trying your new idea for the way that this community can express dissent. You're trying it out in a small and scrappy way and seeing who does it work for and who does it not. Because you're paying attention to those questions of who's belonging and who's not. So the scrappy experimental approach that's inherent in design and that's shared in a safe to fail way in the context of this work, I think is your built-in kind of support network to ensure that doesn't happen. Or that if it does, that you've done it at a small enough scale that you're ready to change course as needed.
That's going to be my new little catchphrase, small and scrappy. Small and scrappy. I'm feeling small and scrappy. Channing, Channing has a question, and I very much appreciate her work at Evanston Township High School. Hi, Channing. Her question is your framework for belonging applicable to the context of the family?
Certainly the notion of where do you feel it and where do you not, what are the moments that need work? And yes, opening up the range of levers. And you might find that there's a whole nother set of levers to play with. One of the levers that I talk about is thinking about schedule and rhythms. So that's a really exciting one to actually concretely play with in the context of family, as well as schools, but definitely in the context of family. So yes, excited to hear what kinds of things you do around that, but getting folks to do that journey map of highs and lows of belonging in a family context, and then picking up on something that you want to work on. Gosh, we actually don't do a good job with, maybe in the family context, it's called conflict, not dissent. That could be a moment to work with. But also, I talk about the moment of flow, recognizing when does your family have a real flow. That can be a really powerful thing to focus on and celebrate. And then you can do the other work to be like, and we really don't have flow when X, Y, or Z is happening. Maybe we want to shift that. So absolutely.
Then I'm going to cherry pick. Liz put in a couple great questions in Q&A, but I'm going to go with the one I like best. You know why? Because I'm not bossy, I'm the boss. So here we go. What I like about Liz here, what if one person's belonging directly conflicts with another person's sense of belonging?
Yeah, so one of the things, so that's a really important question to raise. And it's often raised in a kind of question. So one thing to say just right off the bat is belonging isn't a zero-sum game for any individual, and usually not for groups. And we're lit, right? This is where the notion of intersectionality comes in, which I don't think I actually use the word in the book, but it's absolutely what we need to be thinking about. We are more than one part of our identity, and we have more than one place or context in which to belong. And it is in the commons that we have to work out. My belonging can't overtake your belonging. And we also are working in real time in history. And so we have work to do to repair so that historically marginalized groups get to have their full belonging.
Understood. So we are at 7:59. Morgan, Susie, who wants some closing comments here to take us out to the 8 o'clock hour?
Well, I'll jump in just to say thank you to everyone, and thank you especially to my colleague, friend, and delightful person, Morgan, for being in conversation. It was really fun.